crafters. Well, welcome back to my channel, Margaret Knob Designs. And what we're going to talk about today is Hinge basics for mini albums. So I want to share with you the things that I've learned. These are not my original designs. These are all from other more experienced crafters, and I have learned along the way from many different crafters. And I have not, again, I've not designed any of these. Almost any of the album makers that are out there, you can take a look at their channels and you can see how they've used hinges in their mini albums. But what I wanted to do was kind of talk about some of the basics of hinges. And what we're going to do is talk about three styles, but then I have a fourth one that's a little bit not advanced, but is just a little bit different. I've not done hinges, but one time where it was like an open hinge in the back of a mini album, and I can't say it was my most successful hinge I ever did. So I'm not going to speak to that because I haven't had any success really with that. So if you know of someone who's done a great job with that kind of open hinge, then let me know. But so today what we're going to talk about is the hinge method, which is just a standard hinge going across in your mini album. And then we are also going to talk about what they call a stack hinge, which these are. Some people, I believe, call them stack the deck. I just call it a stack hinge. And then I've seen some crafters do where they actually do just a regular hinge on their pages. So let's start with that one because that's the easiest one to really talk about for hinges. I've seen some crafters do it, not a lot, but what they do is they just do a 1/2 inch hinge because this is their space. This would be their space for the space between their pages. And basically they start off with putting this about 1/4 of an inch away from the end of their spine, and that gets glued down, and then the next one gets glued down right onto this one, and then onto that one, onto that one, onto that one. So that's what this is called when we talk about a hinge, just a regular page hinge method. It's just tabbing the hinges one right after another. Now, I did a little bit of a botch here on my scoring, and I wasn't going to redo it because I would have just done this a little differently if I was doing my own hinges. But basically, you see how I've left 1/4 of an inch, and we need to leave about 1/4 of an inch on this side as well. But the other thing is that you can cut this hinge down just a little bit by 1/4 of an inch because it'll give you enough room for the back cover of your page. So what I want to spend a little bit more time on right now is the two other methods, which is the direct hinges and the stack the deck or stack hinge. I want to talk a little bit more about that and what that looks like. So let's start out with stack the deck or stack hinge and what that looks like. So if you look at these hinges, when I make my stacked hinge, let me just move that away. Basically what that is taking hinge pieces and stacking them together so that your page then connects to this part of your hinge. So your 1/2 inch hinge, it's going to stick or connect onto that. And normally what happens is that there is an even number of hinges when it comes to this method of putting hinges in. So what we would do is we would have a hinge here, which is a 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, and then this is a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch, and there is a 1/2 inch in between there, so you have a good gusset, and then you have a third piece that gives you, allows you 6 pages to be put on this method of hinges. Now, if you have 5 pages, you can adapt it. This is just a little bit too big, but if you always allowing for a 1/2 of an inch only, you can do a hinge that looks like this. Now this is too wide unless you want, this actually gives us a 3/4 inch gusset. We don't want that. But basically, if you want to do 5 hinges instead of 6, you have to cut a piece that looks like this. And it's 2 inches across because you have a 1/2 inch spacer, a 1/2 inch spacer, and your hinge, see, is a 1/2 of an inch. So that 1/2 inch is going down so you can have 5 pieces to that hinge method. So, but normally with a stack the deck or stack hinge method, it's normally done like that with all the pieces stacked up. So one of the things that I do is I often determine how many pages I want in my album before I put my my spine together on my album covers. So if I know that I want to do 6 pages, then I go ahead and figure out my hinges for a 6-page method. So if I was going to do the stack hinge for 6 pages, I would need to have a 3-inch spine. That's how I have that measured out. And the way that I figure that out is if I look at my first hinge, I need to have this be 3.5 inches. And the 3.5 inches, where that comes into play, so that makes sense, is I need a 1/2 inch hinge, 1/2 inch hinge for my page to sit on, a 1/2 inch hinge for my other page to sit on, but I need to have a 1/4 of an inch on both sides of this in order for it to sit so that I sit a little bit away from the bend of the spine. So then I need to drop this down. I need a 1/2 inch here. I need a 1/2 inch here in between these hinges. So the next one that I'm going to cut is going to be 2.5 inches because I need a 1/2 inch here, a 1/2 inch here, and a 1/2 inch in between. So this in here is then going to be 1.5 inches. And then when I do the third stack, this one is going to be 1.5 inches. And what that is that that'll be a 1/2 inch on either side, 1/2 inch in the middle, and I've got a 1/2 inch for both pages. So one of the ways that I figured out in trying to figure out my measurements for doing hinges for this other type is similar to what I'm doing here. I almost always need to have a 1/2 of an inch sheet of paper or 1/2 an inch less than what I would need for all my hinges. So again, for 6 pages, I would need to have a hinge that is 3.5. Here, let me write that down just so you can see that. 3.5. This would be 2.5. And this one would be 1.5. And that's for a 6 spine page album. And that would be for a 3-inch spine. Now, if you wanted a spine that was 2.5 inches, you would then have one flat sheet here. You'd have one flat sheet here for the middle, but then we would use this middle section in order for that to work, because we need to have a center spine in order to have 5 pages. So the measurements for that, let me just lay this down so I get this right for you. The measurements for a 2-inch spine, oops, would be 3 inches. So this is a 2.5 inch spine, right? So we would need to make our paper 3 inches long and then score a 1/2 inch on either side. Then the next sheet that we would need to make is that would be 2 inches and then score a 1/2 inch on either side. And then for this middle hinge, this would also be 2 inches, and you would score 1/2 inches and bring this up to a mountain. And when you bring it up to a mountain, it then can fit in the middle of this hinge to give you a 5-page hinge method for the stack the deck or stack hinge. And as you can see is if this is 2.5 inch spine and a 2.5 inch spine, I've got about 1/4 inch in between there, and which would make it so that my pages have enough room from the back and front covers to close up to my hinges. So that's the stack method, and this is the page method, which is just putting a 1/2 inch hinge on your pages and gluing it in, and then gluing the successive pages by a 1/2 inch all the way along. Now, the most common method that I see people using is a normal hinge method, and that is basically scoring your papers so that you can make a hinge. Basically, it's 1 inch of paper, but it's a 1/2 inch hinge. So let me show you that. So if I was going to do a hinge that is for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep. If I was going to do a hinge for a 2 inch spine, I would want to look at my spine. This is a 2 inch spine, and I want to have 4 inches. So what I would do is I would say 2 inches, and this spine is a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch, so it's really 1 inch of paper. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I would take a 1/2 inch away because I need a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. So it means that my paper or my strip needs to be 5.5 inches in order for me to get 4 hinges. So let's just do it up one size. So if I was going to do 2.5 inch hinge, and I want 5 hinges because I want to make sure that I have a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. These measure an inch of paper, inch of paper, inch of paper, inch of paper, inch of paper. So it's a 2.5 inches, and what I would do then is I would then do 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5, and then I would minus a 1/2, and I would say I need 7 inches for my spine. And that would give me 5 hinges for a 2.5 inch spine. So basically it's always the width of your spine for how many pages that you need. So if I wanted to have 3 inch spine, I would need 6 pages, and it's almost the same method with this as it is with these folded ones. The thing that's different with this is because these are not doubled pieces of paper. But if I had 6 inches, let's say I had 3 inches and I had 6 spines, so it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, that's not very spaced, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hinges. So I would say 3 inches plus 4 plus 5 plus 6, 7, 8, 9 inches minus a 1/2 inch gives me 8.5 inches. And that's how I would measure for the spine that I'm trying to do and the hinge number that I need to do. So what it's saying is that if you want to have 6 hinges, you need to have a 3-inch spine. If you want a 2.5-inch spine, or you want to have 5 hinges, you need a 2.5-inch spine. If you want a 2-inch spine and or 4 pages, then you need a 2-inch spine. Now, with any of this, this is all with a 1/2-inch gusset. The measurements change if you want a 3/4-inch gusset or an inch gusset, but the majority of people will do a 1/2-inch gusset because it gives enough room normally for the dimension of the pages. So let's look at this and just an example. So here I have a sheet of paper, and I have a 7-inch piece of paper. So that would be my 2.5 inches, right? 1, 2, 3, yep. That would be my 2.5 inches. So let's just look at that and see if we come up with 5 spines. So one way, when I first started making my own hinges, I would go along here and I would go, these 2 are for my 1-inch spine. This is my spacer, and I didn't exit because you can see this in your spine between your hinges. So I would X2, stop, X2, stop, X2, stop, X2, stop, X2. So basically what that is it's going along. After I added up how much of the cardstock I needed, I would score 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, all the way down. So it would be a 1/2 inch and then 1 inch, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 7. So once I had that all scored and I have it all X'd off, if I look at it, I bring my 2 X's together and make them a mountain fold. Bring those 2 X's together. Bring these 2 X's together. So I bring my X's together all the way along. And I'm going to bring these X's together, and I'm going to bring these X's. And that's what my hinges all look like. Now you have a choice. You can use score tape on the hinges. You can use glue. You can use whatever medium that you like to use. I personally like the wet glue, and the reason for that is that I did a lot of research on different glues and tapes and what lasts longer. Now, I have not been crafting for 50 years, so I don't have things that have lasted 50 years. I can't attest to that, but just from my research that I did, one of the things that I found is that, which made a lot of sense to me, is that tape often dries out as it ages. But glue, what glue does is that you have enough of that glue so it permeates the surface and bonds the 2 pieces together when it dries, because it merges or melds into the paper, and it is said that it is a better hold. I'm not a scientist. I'm a crafter. So that's why I use the wet glue. It's your choice though. So what I would do is I would come along, and on my first hinge, I come along here and I glue this together where I've got my 2 X's. You see my 2 X's? I hold those together or pull those together. And I do the same thing. I turn it over and I bring my 2 X's together. And then we're going to do the other one. One of the other things that I do all the way along with my hinges is I do work my cardstock back and forth. Now I can't speak for every cardstock out there, but I can speak for artisan cardstock. I'm going to do both of these at one time and tell you that it can withstand a lot of bending and scoring and pulling together. So that's what I'm using here is artisan cardstock. And I'm using the craft because I thought it would be easier to see on camera. So once I have this glued down and I'm comfortable with it being glued, I do spend some time working my hinges back and forth. So I'm going to bend them this way. I'm going to bend them back this way, because if these have a good bend, and don't abuse them, but I do spend some time working them back and forth so that they work freely in the album, and that the pages will connect well to the hinges. So that is what it looks like when we're making the regular hinge method that a lot of people use in their binders. So to talk about this hinge method, again, this is for a 2-inch spine. So if you said that you wanted only 4 pages in your mini album, you're probably going to want a 2-inch spine. If you want to have 5, you're probably going to want a 2.5. If you want 6, you're probably going to want 3 inches or 2 3/4. I'd have to really lay it out and look at it. So I frequently will do my hinges first, and then I will do my spine. And the way that I make that hinge measure work, we're going to review that one more time. If I want a 2-inch spine, I have 2 inches plus 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 inches, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch. So 2 plus 4 is 6, and I subtract off a 1/2 inch because there's a 1/4 here and a 1/4 here. That would give me 5.5 inches, and that's what I would need to make my spine. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, leave me questions down underneath, and I'll explain a little bit further on that. Now, the other thing that you might ask is, for my hinges, how long do I make them? Well, it depends upon the height of your covers. So traditionally, what I do is if I have a cover, let's take it and say I'm going to make a mini album that's 8 by 8. And so that means that it's going to be 8 inches this way, 8 inches this way. So traditionally what I do is I plan that my pages are going to be about a 1/2 inch shorter on either end. And on this end, I usually, because let's say my cover goes to here, I usually make this about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. So it could be 3/4 inch that I might make that smaller, the pages. So if I'm going to do a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch here, that means my page in and of itself in my album is going to be 7 inches high by my page. If I do, let's make it, let's just do a 1/2 inch because it makes it a little bit easier. Then this is going to be 7.5 wide. So it will be 7 inches high by 7.5, because I want to have an extra 1/2 inch here, a 1/2 inch here, and a 1/2 inch there. Now, if you want less in that, you'll just have to measure that out. If it's a 1/4 inch on either end, the top and the bottom, then this would be 7.5, and if this is a 1/4 inch, 7.5 by 7 3/4. It really depends upon, are you going to have anything sticking out of the top of your pages? Are you going to have tabs on your pages on this side? And do you care if they stick out the front of the cover, or you want them inside the cover, because you have a hinge along here that is 1/2 inch, and you're going to attach your pages to that hinge. But you're not going to attach it down all the way of 1/2 inch. You're probably only going to go down 1/4 to 5/8, 5/8, 4/8, to 3/8. So you're probably only going to go down 1/4 to 3/8 of the way on that hinge. So that's going to pull your page out a little bit further than your cover. That's why you want to not make it as wide this way, so it's not sticking out of your cover. I hope that makes sense to you. So then when you make your spine should be the same height that your both covers are. And then you just need to determine your hinge length that's going to go on your spine based upon the height of your pages and the depth of your pages. And then you'll measure that out for that. So the last thing that I wanted to show you, and it is something that I've done a few times on my own, but it's not something that I do very often. Sometimes I have pages that I think are going to end up being fairly heavy, or there's a lot to them. So what I do is something that I call, it's kind of like a double hinge method. And what I do with that is I do make my hinges like I normally do with a 1/2 inch, but I add 1/4 inch on. So when I come along and I score for this hinge, I lay my sheet down here, and I will go ahead on my scoreboard and I will score at 1/4 inch, and then I will go up 1/2 inch, so at 3/4, and I'll score. Then I'll go up 1/2 inch because I want a half inch and a 1/2 inch in order to make my spine. Here, let me actually do this. Might be a little bit clearer. So when I first start out, I'm going to do 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to go up 1/2 inch at 3/4. Then I'm going to go up 1/2 inch at 1 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to leave a gusset of 1/2 inch. Oh, I'm sorry, at 1 1/4. Then I'm going to also leave 1/4 inch again, because I have 1/4 inch here and 1/4 inch here, and then I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch gusset. So I'm scoring at 2. Then I have 1/4 inch hinge, a 1/2 inch hinge to 2 3/4, 1/2 inch hinge to 3 1/4, 1/4 inch hinge, so I go to 3 1/2. Then I need a 1/2 inch spacer. I go to 4. I go to 1/4 inch hinge to a 1/2 inch hinge to a 1/2 inch hinge, 1/4 inch hinge, and I don't need this spacer on here. That's only if I keep going on. But that basically would give me a spine, a hinge, not a spine, but a hinge that would look like, I wonder if you can see this. Yeah, this might look better. It basically looks like this. So let me see if, let me grab a piece of, oh, here, this will work. So basically what that would look like is this. So, and then remember before I talked about that I X'd my hinges? So these are my hinges. My space, my hinge. my hinge, my space, my hinge, my hinge. So my hinge has 2 levels to it. And the 2 levels that I have is, I have a 1/4 of an inch and a 1/2 of an inch. I have a 1/2 of an inch and a 1/4 of an inch. And so what that does is that sits like this. And then if I need extra bending for my spine, because I need more room for it to really lay down and bend, because I have more depth to my pages, or I just want them to lay a little bit flatter, I have this 1/4 inch of room for it to lay down in my mini album. So that's another method that I use. And when I do put that together, I put this together just like I would with any other hinge. Let's put this together. So I'm going to glue together my 1/2 inches on both sides and my 1/4 inches on both sides, because that makes one hinge. Makes one hinge. And then we're going to have a 1/2 inch spacer in between those hinges. And what we're going to do is come together and bring this side up. We've got our 1/2 inch right there, but we've matched up our 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch spine. And then we have our 1/2 inch gusset here, and we're going to glue this expanded spine. I'm going to actually go ahead and, here's my scissors. I'm going to cut this off so I don't want to confuse anyone. So what ends up happening is that my spine now looks like this. Not sure if you can see that they look taller, but if you look at them like this, you can see that the hinges look taller. And the reason for that is because this hinge, now I can put my page all the way down the 1/2 inch, and my hinge will bend at the 1/4 of an inch, so that I have more floppiness on my page. Didn't work these as well as I should have before, but so now I have a 1/4 of an inch to be able to make my page bend better if I want it to be even lay flatter, because I have a lot of depth to it. Here, let me just score this a little better. Okay. All right. So now I've got this scored a little better, and you can see where my spine or my hinge bends a little bit there, my hinge bends a little there, and my hinge bends a little there. So what's going to happen is that I put my page down on my hinge to here, and I still have this room in between my space and my page, so that it allows me to be able to bend those pages even a little bit more freely and have them lay flat. Now you can do this with a 1/4 of an inch, or I've even seen some crafters do it where they have a 1/2 of an inch. So they actually have a whole inch hinge, and what they do is that they have an extra 1/2 inch for bending if their pages are quite bulky. So that's just kind of a secondary type of hinge that you can do if you've got bulky pages. But I traditionally go with just the standard method of the 1/2 inch hinges. The 1/2 inch hinges like that is usually what I do. And then I put my glue on the back of there, and I make sure that I am about, I can easily fit this into my pages. So if the height if my height of my page is 7.5, or it's 7, let's say it's 7.5 is the height, I probably am going to cut my hinge at 7.25 to give myself some room to slip that page onto that hinge. So you have to give allowances. The other thing that I do, if I have a really tight fit to my hinges, what I will do is I will come along and I will miter the edges. If I don't have a tight fit, I don't miter the edges. I don't go along and do that. I just like the sturdiness of the height of that. So that's pretty much it. I hope that that was pretty clear and that it wasn't confusing for you. I was hoping to be able to give examples and lay this out so that it wasn't confusing. If it's really confusing and you are a more advanced album maker and it seems confusing to you, please let me know. I always want to hear the feedback on doing something in like a tutorial like this. And if you are a beginner and you're completely lost, then please leave me a message down below as well. I'd like to know maybe what was difficult to understand. But if you are, a beginner and you're a little bit lost, then I would just recommend to listen to it again and try to make, take one of the hinge methods and try to make it for yourself. Because sometimes it's just about using hands-on, and it's about doing it. And it's about going along and maybe Xing something, marking it. And as you can see, these hinges that I've done are only about 3 or 4 inches long. And that's because I was just testing it out to see if it would work. So that's what I would do, is play around with your paper. It's just paper. And I mean, if you don't want to use any cardstock, then use some copy paper. And it's not going to be your hinge for your mini album, but it's comes in more abundance than your cardstock does. So don't be afraid to play around, test it out, try it out, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If this was helpful, please give me a like and please subscribe. I would love to have you join me on my journey, this crafty journey. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Bye.